But I want to know guys that you have circled, neon flashing lights, stay away from them in the first and second round. So the top 40 picks. I want you to tell me guys that just bust is the word we use, and it's okay if you say that. I don't mind. But basically just this is not a guy that I'm really high on. I think he's overvalued. I think people are reaching for him, et cetera, whatever phraseology you want to use. I want to know guys you are absolutely staying away from in the first and second round as I lose your wonderful face. Go to Sinkers
I'm still
Beverages,
here.
by the way,
This
on the Kingston Group.
stupid Google Chrome is messing up for whatever reason today. I tell you, one guy, if we're talking to guys that I do not want the Titans drafted in the first and second round, I'll start with a pair of wide receivers that I think are terribly, terribly overrated. And that would be Adonai Mitchell and Keon Coleman. You've heard me talk about them before on here. You've heard me talk about them on Football and Other F Words. They are all physical specimen. They're like the opposite of body shaming. Like they are surface level, good looking wide receivers that have not put it together on the field consistently week to week. Adonai Mitchell, the more you get into the advanced stats, the more you get into his actual weekly game by game production, the way he's not a contested catch guy, the way that same for Keon Coleman can't separate. Neither of these guys are the very definition of what you were talking about, boom or bust. And if I'm the Tennessee Titans, I'm not drafting either of those guys at pick 38 or anywhere in the first round if they trade back or anything like that. So to me, those two wide receivers, I am so far out on. It's ridiculous. I just cannot. I cannot. The more film I watch, the more data I read, the more that other people put out posts and talk about stuff that they have seen. I'm just like, these guys are just so boomer bust. The variance between the boomer busts is a Grand Canyon size gap. I think they are way more likely to be busts than they are to be booms. And I've heard people reference that, oh, you need to draft Keon Coleman, at pick 15 if you trade back and you're the Titans and he's still there. Pick him at 15 or 18. I'm like, no, there is no way the Tennessee Titans need to draft Keon Coleman. They need to draft guys that can at least generate some separation, or if they can't, can at least do contested catch situations, and neither of these guys can do that.
So I have a lot of receivers written down, but for both sort of first and second round, but I'm going to kind of package them together kind of like you did, because I don't think Keon Coleman or Adonai Mitchell, AD Mitchell, are options for the Titans in the top 20. Could they be options for the Titans at 38? Maybe, but even then, I'm not on board with that. Now I'm off Adonai Mitchell altogether. I'm with you, and I would put Xavier Worthy in there as well. I don't think he is worth a pick.
I will say this: Worthy plays a lot bigger. Like, he would rather run through you than run out of bounds. Now, it doesn't always work, but I because he's a small guy. But I will say, I think out of the two, I've kind of switched early on in the college season. I was like, okay, AD Mitchell, I feel like is going to be the better pro than Xavier Worthy if I had to choose. Now I'm kind of like, I don't know. I think Xavier Worthy is going to land in a good spot where I think he's going to be the better pro than Adonai Mitchell.
If he's the 32nd pick to the Chiefs, then yes. But they also just went and got Hollywood Brown, so I don't know. But that's the thing.
But if he picked 38 to the Titans, I'm all for it.
I don't know if I like
because
that.
the Titans need that. He's a guy that they could put in the slot, and the Titans need that guy.
I would rather. So if they're picking 38 at wide receiver, and this is not what the point of this exercise was supposed to be, but if we're picking at 38, there's a number of guys. Roman Wilson's not a guy I love, but he is an elite slot receiver, maybe the best slot receiver in the group. I like Ricky Pearsall as well. There's other guys I like that I think are the more complete player than Xavier Worthy, but Xavier Worthy does. I think the 4-2 is going to push him up boards and make him overvalued. That's what I think is going to happen. I think AD Mitchell, same thing. Keon Coleman's the one I think drops in the draft and I think actually becomes a value. And he's actually the player I like the most out of all these guys. But I think it's more closer to like pick 50 or mid 50s or late fit. Like if he's back at 48 or they trade back to 52 or something like that, then I can see Keon Coleman being a really good option. I like Coleman a lot more than you do. I'm with you on AD Mitchell. It sounds like you like Worthy a little bit more than me. I want to go to the first round though and say I don't want Brian Thomas at 13, 14, or 15. I don't want him at that rate. I think he benefited. I think he benefited from the offense. I think he benefited from Neighbors and Daniels. I think he benefited from defenses playing three deep the entire time. He had free range run off the line of scrimmage. He was wide open a lot of times because of the scheme and because of how tough it was to stop that entire offense. I don't think I actually would move Neighbors down a notch too. He's clearly wide receiver 3 for me on my board, and I'm not sure I would be fine with Neighbors at like 9. I don't know if I want him at 7, but again, we're talking
What's the
about
difference between 7 and 9?
A third round pick, maybe a third round pick. But ultimately, Thomas is the one I'm focused on. Thomas is the guy I don't think is worthy of the first round pick with a team that has Ridley and Hopkins and needs another position that I think is, as we get into this offensive line conversation, I think are graded higher than Brian Thomas overall. Now, if you trade back to 24, you trade back to 26, you trade back to 28, and now we're having a discussion about Brian Thomas versus Adonai Mitchell, Brian Thomas versus Xavier Worthy versus Troy Franklin, who is another name I would absolutely stay as far away from as possible. Troy Franklin is a one-trick pony that can do the one thing really well, but that's about it. Then I'm interested in Brian Thomas. But if you're telling me top 20, top 15, I think that's a risky play, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that I would probably rather take a Marius Mims
also high risk
than Brian Thomas, right? Like I think I would rather take a Marius Mims over Brian Thomas. I don't know if I'm really set on that, but I could see what you're talking about. But I think Brian Thomas is a really, really good wide receiver. And I heard everything that you laid out and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, I think the physicality, the athleticism, the what he's able to do with the ball in his hands at his size, the ability for the contested catches, the ability to turn it and be a home run hitter, that's just something you can't teach. And I don't know if the scheme is that much different. I don't feel like it's a scheme where you're just like, well, they're always open, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I feel like
they were open a lot.
they did enough off the off the line.
That's true.
To get open themselves. And they're also two physical not big, but two physical wide receivers with unmatched athleticism. I just find it really hard to turn that down at 15. I think there's a good debate to be had about, okay, let's say the Tennessee Titans were drafting at 15. Are you taking Mims, Fuaga, Troy Fautanu, or are you taking Brian Thomas? And I think that's a good debate that has no true clear answer. But I think I would probably side with Brian Thomas because I feel like there is a bigger drop off from Brian Thomas to what you get in the second round versus Mims and Patrick Paul or some of these other guys, Kings of Sumatia in the second round.
Okay,
you know
I see what you're saying. No, I do, and I could see that argument for sure. I think Neighbors and Thomas both have a lot of polish to go. I just think in general, I think they have a lot of work to do to sort of maximize like the DeAndre Hopkins football IQ, right? Like what makes DeAndre Hopkins special.
Based on that, something just popped in my head. They're high pedigree guys, obviously, because they're talked about in the top 15. Wouldn't you rather have the top 15 guy with the untapped potential and the athleticism, and he has the production to match in college, even if it is 1 year, than the guy with no flaws or the more higher floor, I guess you would say, but the way lower ceiling? Because to me, Ladd McConkey is the perfect example to be like the yin and yang Brian Thomas, right? Like Brian Thomas isn't polished, doesn't run all the routes, but he has everything else you want in a wide receiver.
Yep.
And the Ladd McConkey is the guy that he does everything perfectly. If you press him up at the line, and he's a slot only guy, but if you press him up at the line, he's probably not going to do much in the NFL. But he does everything else perfectly. He's a day one starter that you can get in round 2. But wouldn't you rather have Brian Thomas long haul?
It depends. At 38, I'd rather have McConkey than 15 with Thomas. But it's so. I love that you brought him up because I wrote down Ladd McConkey versus Brian Thomas because I think they're the two ends of the extremes of the type of prospect that we're talking about. And I can see Ladd McConkey having a long, productive career in the NFL. but I don't even think at 38 I want him. I would rather go Roman Wilson, Ricky Pearsall, and take a little bit of a risk on a little bit more upside than, sort of to your point, knowing how high the floor is going to be, but maybe how low the ceiling is going to be. To me, here's what's interesting. Malik Neighbors at 7, Brian Thomas at 18, Ladd McConkey at 38. Which one do you like the best? And I might actually lean Thomas in the middle over
think
Neighbors.
Because how low you put Brian Thomas, I don't know if he'll go that low, but how low you put Brian Thomas in that scenario, I'd go Brian Thomas.
I think to your original question, though, I think it is. This is where we talk, and we weren't going to talk about this, but this is where we talk about the horizontal and the vertical big board. It is, where is Brian Thomas relative to tackles 3, 4, and 5? Yeah. And if Brian Thomas is like your number 3 tackle, right? You go with me here on this, right? If you've got Alt and whoever, Olu, and then Brian Thomas, or do you have Alt, Olu, Latham, Fuaga, then Brian Thomas? And I think I would have.
I'd probably lean that.
I would have Brian Thomas behind the top 4 tackles. That's what
for
I
me.
Would
it's very much, it's more Fatanu, Mims, I think, more than it is Fuaga and Latham and Thomas. You get what I'm saying? Like, I think it's really more Mims and Fatanu.
So Mims is the only tackle name I wrote down that I could see being high bust category, because I don't think they're going to be taking the guys in the 20s. Like, I don't expect them to be picking in the 20s. So if you're banking on Tyler Guyton to be your starting left tackle, there's plenty of risk in that. But I don't think that's what they're going to be doing. So if you're picking 14, 15, 16, 17, if you're picking 7 or 9 even, or 11, there's not a lot of names. I mean, look, Terrion Arnold is interesting to me because I think he's a great corner. But I don't like the pick in the first round because I think he's got a chance to draw a lot of penalties. I think he's going to need to develop, and they don't need him. So that's a name I don't really like there in the first round. Brock Bowers is a high risk player, also a ton of upside, and could be an elite playmaker in this league. But how many tight ends that are taken in the top 12 or 15 turn out to be Hall of Famers? I mean, Antonio Gates, like, I don't know, like who else? And so that one I see being a lot of risk involved potentially. That's one that I may stay away from. And then Latu from UCLA is interesting to me because I think he's got a lot of things that I like about him. But when
I can't talk myself into him.
I can't either. If you lack speed and athleticism and power, I'm like, what? Like, your IQ can only make up for so much, and if you're a pass rusher, you need one thing to be almost elite to be a first round draft pick. So I would not want to see them take Latu in the first round.
Here's where I'm at. Chop Robinson is right now the consensus big board number 28. Out on Chop Robinson.
I agree.
You can't talk me into Chop Robinson. I'm out. I think him at 38, him anywhere in the first, I'm out. That's a guy that, for me, he's a buyer beware. Do not touch him. Do not draft him. I would also put in there, and this is going to sound weird because we've talked about we don't need cornerbacks, and I've been pretty high on the Missouri guys anyway. I'm not feeling Ennis Rexstraw at this next level. I can't get there. He's at pick 30. He's number 38 on the consensus big board. Not really feeling that. And I'm also pick 38. I could be talked into it, but I'm not feeling Edgerrin Cooper or Peyton Wilson at pick 38.
I knew you were going to say.
To me, I feel like they're very much both buyer beware categories for the rounds that we were talking about.
Timmy, hang on a second, because I've got some evidence here. I knew I could have written it down. He will mention Edgerrin Cooper as a guy you just stay away from in the first 2 rounds. So Timmy says, did you watch Brock Bowers? How the hell is he a risk? He was dominating as a freshman. Just because he's a tight end, you don't need to fear him. Look, here's the deal. Zach, tell Timmy, who has been the biggest Brock Bowers proponent that you have known in like you? I've been obsessed with Brock Bowers for multiple seasons. Yes. The way his physicality, overall elite athleticism, and the injury track record is a concern for me. And I'm not saying that he's not worth it. I'm not saying that if somebody takes him at number 9, he won't be a great player. He absolutely could be. And he's the best player I've seen in college football last season. Fully healthy, best player in the game. Does that mean he's going to be a great NFL player? No. So you have to calculate the risk. And for me, at that position with Chig and with Josh Wiley, he's a risk as a first-round pick. He's a luxury pick almost.
To be clear, because Timmy's kind of like making his own. He's arguing with himself and making his own thing. It is injury history and the physical stature of Brock Bowers and holding up in the NFL. Not that he plays tight end.
Yeah.
Not that he played for Georgia or anything like that. Is those two things, and that is legitimate concerns you should have going to the NFL. I just want to make sure that we all understand that we do not care that he is a tight end, because we, both of us, understand there is such a thing as positionless football.
Yep. And like Gronkowski is an example of this, a guy that has elite, like you cannot his athletic ability is infallible. Like you can't look at Rob Gronkowski and be upset about anything he does athletically. But what ended his career? And again, if they draft Brock Bowers and he ends up as a Rob Gronkowski career, you take it. But his career ended because he couldn't, because of a variety of things. And he was injured in college. Gronkowski was same thing. So, and guess what happened? He fell in the draft, and they get those guys. Where do all these great tight ends get drafted? They get drafted in the second round. They don't get drafted in the first round. So that's just one I would point out as there's a risk there. And I say that because I'm comfortable saying I've been as pro Brock Bowers as anybody covering the Titans as a fan of him as a player. But I agree with you on Chop Robinson. I've got him written down. I've also got Johnny Wilson written down, Xavier Legette written down. I'm not touching those guys in the second round. Tavondre Sweat's an interesting one. I'm really turned off right now by Tavondre
I don't
Sweat.
know why.
Call it a gut
He's
feel.
Good. He's good. He's full athletic for his size.
I know.
He's got the drive. He's got quick hands off the line. He is a 3 down. Maybe once he's a little bit more conditioned, but he has the technique and the ability to be a 3 down player. I do not understand this narrative that he's a 2 down only run stuffer, because that's not what he was in college.
I hear you.
He's better than Brian Murphy in college. That's all I'm going to say.
He was. It doesn't mean he's going to be better pro. Here's what's funny about the Texas players. Other than Byron Murphy, I don't like most of the Texas players from the top of the draft. You can add Brooks at running back. You can add Sanders at tight end. You can add both receivers and Sweat. I am a little bit, I'm going to say, bearish on those guys. Maybe at the top of the draft. The Texas players I like are at the end of the draft.
Sweat and Christian Jones will be the two best pros out of this Texas class.
I like Jones a lot. I also like the linebacker late too. If you're going 7th round, you can get you can get the linebacker late as well. So let me. So there's some names. Those are a lot of names that we would stay away from. Guys that we think could be busts, high risk players. We think the Titans should stay away from in the first and the second round.